Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And we've come from an advance preview screening of Spike Lee's BlacKkKlansman, which is out this weekend.
Yes.
On general release. We saw a preview screening with a Q&A.
Yes.
That was at the BFI, was broadcast or simulcast to cinemas around the country.
Yes,
around the world even.
Yes, we've just come from it, and Mike already wants to see it again.
I already want to see it again. I think it's a really interesting film. And I think it will become more interesting on reflection. I think it's probably the case we'll get into spoiler territory quite early. So before we do any of that, I would say I think it's a really, really interesting film to see, with a ton of good performances and a beautiful look, and a clearly kind of Spike Lee in the Q&A kind of referred to it as sort of contemporary history or contemporary version of history, which I think is really true.
I think it's what Spike Lee has been consistently doing over the last 30 years, but only when at his best, which I think this is, which is to generate a cultural... this film will generate a cultural conversation on things that are important and that matter. And it'll get people quite heated, actually. The film, to me, is a great, great success in achieving just that.
Yeah. It's the true story of a man called Ron Stallworth, who was a black man who entered the police force in the 1970s in Colorado, and kind of undertook a sort of ad hoc undercover sort of investigation of the KKK, which was undergoing, I think, a kind of resurgence at the time. It's always been bubbling. I think in this period it was coming back under David Duke.
Yes.
The kind of twist, I suppose, that came across in the trailers was that Ron Stallworth was speaking to the Klan on the phone, them not knowing he's a black man and thinking he's a white man, and then he was played in real life when they had to meet him by a white cop who was working with him. That is the spoiler-free sort of précis of the story.
Yeah.
Spoilers from now on, right? We had a brief conversation just afterwards, the briefest, about what you thought of, let me just double check, John David Washington.
Yes.
Who is Denzel Washington's son, I'm led to believe.
That's interesting.
Who plays Ron Stallman.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting, actually, because... I think he's very good, but I think he's not a star. And by that, kind of, somebody who almost automatically draws your attention. It's not a major flaw in the film, but it is a little bit of a lack. Yeah, in the sense that he's playing opposite...
Adam Driver,
who is very charismatic, but who in fact is playing a supporting part.
Yeah. He's the white counterpart to his Ron Stallman.
Yes, and yet I found myself more watchful of what Adam Driver was doing, than of what the protagonist was doing. So now that might just be because I'm white and kind of a black audience might not share that experience, but I just thought that the lead actor lacked star quality.
I think there's an element of truth to that. I liked his stillness. I think he was going for probably a kind of a coolness maybe, or a sort of like a stoic power in his stillness. I was saying that the film kind of starts off with him entering the police force and being asked at sort of point blank range, what would you do if someone called you a nigger? And he responds completely stoically and straight-faced and said, and he's pushed on it, and eventually he says something like, if I had to, I would stand up to it, or something. I can't remember exactly what he says, but essentially...
The first thing he says is, would anybody call me that in this place?
Yeah. But he doesn't do that with a kind of, would they do that? He does it very, very deadpan.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can imagine kind of Ryan Gosling sort of being an influence on the performance. You know what I mean? That complete blankness and letting kind of everything around him kind of do the dramatic work. It's like almost like a Buster Keaton. I think you can see those kind of influences on it, and I think it is not like the way that Ryan Gosling does it. You can't take his eyes off Ryan Gosling when he's doing nothing. That's not the case with John David Washington in this. But I didn't have a problem with him still. I did like him as a central.
Yeah, no, he's very good. You know, I mean, in a way, kind of, you can't fault him. And this is just kind of an observation, because I actually think that, you know, maybe the difference between this film being a success, which I'm very sure it will be, and it being, you know, like a breakout hit or something, would be, you know, in casting, you know, a charismatic star in that part, actually. You know, of which now there are several, you know, that he could have chosen from.
I feel he's an appropriate kind of actor. I mean, that sounds like damning with faint praise. Let's say he was appropriate rather than great, but I think he really fits the role.
Okay, well,
so maybe that's a taste issue. Who knows? But that's a slight difference between us, I suppose.
Yes. Or is it really? Because, you know, I'm not disputing that he's good. He's okay. Like, you can't fault anything that he does.
Well, I think it's taste insofar as your taste would appear to be someone more charismatic, whereas mine, I appreciate the reasons or the way that he plays the role.
But the way that he plays the role and whether he has charisma or not are two separate things.
Well, okay, what he brings to the role or the way that
imagine a young Denzel Washington playing this, or the young kid who was in Fruitvale Station and...
Michael B. Jordan.
You know, or somebody like that playing this part.
Maybe there would be too much attitude.
Well, it's not a question of... It's not attitude, it's just charisma. You know, kind of... you know, or... it, as they say, or, you know, whatever. I mean, because it's very kind of undefinable what makes some people, you know, people you really want to watch, and others are just kind of, you know, more ordinary. You know, kind of, they could be very good actors, but still not be stars. I think this, you know, the film would have benefited from having a star play that part.
Okay.
You know, and by star, I don't just mean a name or something that's currently fashionable, but just someone with that charisma. Yeah.
Yeah, I do get what you mean. And yeah, I appreciate that.
Anyway, that's so far from, you know, what the film is about.
Of course it is.
You know, and what it achieves, you know, and how it makes you feel. I mean, actually, there were so many things that I found, you know, absolutely kind of just extraordinary. So, you know, one of the things that Spike Lee is often accused of is that he makes films about issues. Right, that never go beyond issues, that he's not a real artist, he's just kind of, you know, mobilizing kind of a series of debates or dramatizing a series of debates in the culture that he once heard. And yet there were things in this film that just, I thought, were like so incredibly striking. There was that montage of black faces, you know, hearing the speaker at the Black Power meeting, right?
Yeah, his name Kwame Ture, I think?
Is the cinematographer?
No, the speaker.
The speaker,
Kwame Ture, yeah.
So, who I thought was very charismatic, by the way. But anyway, you remember those close-ups? They're like these glowing close-ups of these black faces with afros, you know, kind of enraptured. And each face is kind of made, you know, beautiful and attentive. And, you know, and actually there was just something so very artful about just the composition and lighting of those faces, right? I thought,
and they're composed in these kind of ethereal sort of, compositions where they move together and beyond each other and fade in and out across each other on the screen.
Yes. So I thought that was just, you know, incredibly artful, cinematically. I thought the narrative and the way that it kind of developed, right? Because, you know, kind of part of what the narrative tries to do is A, condemn the KKK, B, give a history of it, and that moment when, you know, Harry Belafonte appears and gives a history lesson about that lynching of that young black man who was, and the lynching was kind of sparked by Birth of a Nation.
Yeah, it happened the year after.
Yeah, can you remember the name of the man who was lynched?
I'm just finding it's Jesse something, but I will find it. One moment.
While you find it, let me just say there was something so moving to me about seeing, the great Harry Belafonte give that history lesson to those young people. And actually, again, the conception of that scene, the way that it was shot, these black kids holding up, these blown up pictures of this historical incident that had been sparked by a movie, being given by, next to Sidney Poitier, the most charismatic and greatest kind of black film star, of the mid, 20th century. And also, I just find the whole idea of Harry Belafonte kind of moving, right? Because, he was Mr. Calypso, Mr. Light Entertainer, Mr. Movie Star. He was so incredibly handsome, right? He had everything to lose and nothing to gain by becoming a black rights activist at the time that he did. And yet he made that choice, which could conceivably have meant him losing everything, really.
Yeah.
By being politicized in that way. So I have enormous admiration for him as an artist and as a man and as a political activist. And it was moving to me to see him now, looking his age, right, but giving this history lesson to the younger people. I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah, Jesse Washington is the name of the man who was killed, who was lynched. And I wanted to bring this up because I think the film is really conversant with the idea of the importance of culture.
Yes.
And the importance of imagery. There are 4 central moments where films are talked about and their importance is related. So the first is when Kwame Ture is giving this polemical speech to a group of black students. He talks about watching Tarzan.
Yes.
And how Tarzan is a white man and his enemies are black savages in the jungle. And he says, when I was a kid, I cheered for Tarzan. I said, kill them. And I realised when I grew up that I was saying, kill me. And so now when I watch Tarzan,
yes.
I'd say, kill the beast.
Yes.
Something like that. Which speaks to, it basically speaks to the power that culture has to shape what you think of yourself, and everything
Completely.
around you. Then a little later, there's a conversation between Ron and his girlfriend, who is this girl who the president of the students' chapter that invited the speaker.
Yes, the black the Black Power movement at the university.
Right, where they're talking about blaxploitation movies of the time, essentially.
Yes.
And one of the things that they bring up is Shaft or Superfly. And she says, in quite explicitly, clearly Shaft. An undercover detective is a pimp is the kind of imagery that is hugely damaging to black people, basically. So, and again, it's very simple and it's not really made a lot of, but it's talking about the importance of image and what it.
Yes. Though they also mention all the Pam Grier films, Coffee and Cleopatra Jones. It's the blaxploitation films they mention. They have an appreciation of them, let's say, but a critical one.
Yes, absolutely. Then Ron is on the phone to David Duke, and they're talking about Hattie McDaniel.
Yes.
And Duke is they're talking about basically black people having worked as maids in their houses, and they talk about how like a good one is like a good dog. You don't really know why, but you miss them when they're gone, sort of thing. But they're not human, right? And they talk about Hattie McDaniels and the kind of and Duke. It's tough to remember the specifics of it, but the overall kind of effect is to say, I have an appreciation of black people because I really like this one.
Yes.
And did you know that she won the Oscar, by the way?
Yes.
In that. I mean, it's actually tough to believe that David Duke would have cared that much about wanting to impress someone about how much he liked a black person, but it is in the film.
Well, but then it's also, I love her like I love a dog.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then the final one, and really the most important one, is, as you mentioned, Birth of a Nation.
Yes.
And it's shown in cross-cutting. There's a meeting of the students where Harry Belafonte's character is talking, who is he's playing a friend of Jesse Washington's who saw everything happen and then hid and has his story to tell. he tells this story very soberly, and at points actually he's talking directly to the camera. It's a real address to the audience, and they are holding up these blown up images of real photos that were taken at the time, and he talks about these photos were made into postcards, and that's intercut with the Klan having a full-on robes meeting ritual with candles and putting water on, and all this sort of stuff, and then showing a screening of Birth of a Nation, and having popcorn and screaming and laughing along and all that sort of thing, and it's shown in direct conflict, and it's this story about this kind of fundamental, like as you say, one of the points Harry Belafonte's character makes is the lynching of Jesse Washington happened as a direct consequence of that film coming out. What the film depicted is what was enacted in real life a year later.
Yes. And then in the screening afterwards, Spike Lee talked about Gone with the Wind, which begins the film.
Should we be honest?
We should be honest.
We should be honest.
We missed like the first 10 seconds of the film, or the first...
Yes, there is an opening that is on the set of Gone with the Wind, I believe, which we did miss. We walked in when Ron was being interviewed for the job in the police department.
That's right.
That's one of the reasons I want to see the film twice, because I want to make sure I catch that opening.
Yeah. So basically part of the argument of the film is that kind of movie shape culture, that the influence might not be direct, right, but it's there. Yeah, and kind of and one of the questions of representation is the ways that we are represented in culture affect the ways that we are represented in life. And the film is really marvelous about tying up the questions, or bringing together the questions of racism, anti-Semitism, and homophobia. They're all interlinked. Two of them, major plot points, kind of the Adam Driver character only comes to his consciousness as a Jew at the moment that he experiences anti-Semitism. Though, of course, unlike his black counterpart, he can pass. He has been passing. And of course, you only experience anti-Semitism once somebody has a consciousness, or once an anti-Semite has a consciousness of you as a Jew, right? So not experiencing it doesn't mean that it's not there if you're not out as a Jew, right? So, this thing of how are we interpolated in culture as not belonging, or as objects of racism and so on. Well, if you're a gay person who's not out and who's not, seen to be gay, then, you will only occasionally be interpolated, through homophobia when, maybe some homophobic joke is made or something. If you are not, out as a Jew, then kind of the only moments of anti-Semitism are when, kind of somebody expresses an opinion on Jews, which might be never, which doesn't mean that they don't feel it, right? Yeah. Whereas kind of, with race, you can't hide, right? So, you are the victim of these things in very different ways, because in a way, you cannot pass.
Yeah. Well, this is something I wanted to bring up, particularly as a Jew. So one of the things is that what Ron says to, let me just check his name, the character Adam Driver plays, because it's not enough to just to call him his white counterpart.
Yes, sorry.
I'm doing the same thing.
His name is Philip, I think.
Flip. They actually call him Flip. Yeah, Flip Zimmerman. So he's Jewish, and he takes, but it's not really important at the start. You get one reference when he's sort of taking on the role of Ron for the first time. Yeah. They say, take off that Jew necklace. He says, it's not a Jew necklace, it's a Star of David. But it's kind of light, right? You don't really peg him as anything. And this is an example of him sort of passing. It's not important really that he's Jewish. It hasn't been until now. He's just basically a white guy. Yes. And as he, one of the Klan members who he first meets, one of the first group that he meets, is very suspicious of him as a Jew, and has kind of pegged him and is trying to get out of him, and also it's quite threatening. I mean, he's pulling a gun on him at certain points. He says, take this Jew lie detector test. So he wants him, and this kind of really confronts him. But it kind of confronts him intellectually, but not viscerally. Like, he doesn't respond like, hey, fuck you, because it's kind of not important. Basically, this really spoke to me, because basically a lot of what Flip was saying was basically the way I have felt for a very long time about my Jewishness. Right? That he says it's never been important to me, and I was barely even raised Jewish. And he says, like, never had a bar mitzvah, which is not the case with me. I mean, from what Flip says, I was more Jewish than he was. Like, I had a bar mitzvah, but the central idea is the same. I don't feel like I'm that Jewish, and it's not that the situation confronts him as much as Ron confronts him.
Yes.
It's only really when Ron points out to him that you and I are the same that he starts to think about it, and he has a moment a little bit later of like real reflection where he's just talking. I think Ron's in the room, but he's talking really to himself about what he feels of his Jewish identity, and how he's having to kind of start to confront it himself, and it really spoke to me because like. They talk about him passing as a WASP phrase. It's like a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Like, it's never had to matter to him in a way that obviously it has had to matter to Ron. That like he can't hide being black. Although Ron does talk about light-skinned black people passing for white and making their lives, improving their lives basically. In that way. I found that personally very interesting. I spoke to you before about an article written by Howard. What's his name? The Manchester author who's Jewish. Howard Jacobson.
Oh, right, okay.
He wrote an article in The Guardian, which again was along these lines. It said a lot of stuff that I've been thinking.
I think you sent that to me, but repeat.
Yeah, the general thrust of the article, and you should look it up, Howard Jacobson in The Guardian, he was basically writing about the recent kind of rise of anti-Semitism and how he had grown up not really feeling all that Jewish. A lot of Jews are atheist. I mean, like, the idea of a Jewish atheist is very well enshrined, in kind of culture. The Jews are they have an identity which goes beyond the religion in a way that doesn't quite work in other religions, or in the same way, or to the same extent. But that what Howard Jacobson was talking about was as someone who would ideally be voting for Labour, the anti-Semitism row that's been going on in the Labour Party at the moment is incredibly troubling, because I thought this was a party that I could identify with and I would be happy to vote for. And even though I haven't really identified as Jewish in any meaningful way for basically ever, now it's starting to become a problem for me.
I think for me the issue around that, which I think the film makes clear, is that in a way nobody gives a fuck what you individually think of yourself, and actually probably you shouldn't either, right? Because the fact is there's a social dimension to this. So whether you feel culturally Jewish, whether you have any stake in that Jewish identity or whatever, so long as people have a stake in oppressing you for it, whether you like it or not, it's an issue. Right,
exactly. And this is kind of what it was getting at. Like, I am now starting to feel more Jewish, more in touch with that part of myself than I ever have, because of the fact that it's getting threatened now, and threatened more vocally in public.
The film makes it so clear. At the end, there's this fantastic montage, of the incidents in Charlottesville where, all the white supremacists and, the car just drove through a whole bunch of protesters. And then all of those students, what were they chanting? The Jews won't own me.
Jews will not replace us.
Jews will not replace us. I mean, in 2017, to be hearing things like that in one of the most advanced countries in the world, and for 100 years presuming itself to be the torchlight of democracy, is just shocking, right? I mean, one would be very shocked to hear that in Iraq, actually. To have thousands of demonstrators chanting like that. But to have it in the US is...
And the fact is that we've seen this footage. None of this footage is new. At least if you are a reasonably attentive follower of the news, like this, this won't escape your attention. But that it comes at the end of this film, which is set in the 1970s, and it goes, no, this is happening today.
Yes.
And it is getting to be as bad as it ever was.
Yes.
And I mean, lynchings have not yet returned, as far as we know, to America.
No, but we've seen black people of all ages completely brutalized, by the police in ways that are deeply shocking, and
the film ends...
And that come close to it.
And the film ends with a tribute, which I didn't expect, actually. It shows footage of the car attack on the anti-Unite the Right rally. It was a counter alt-right rally in Charlottesville.
That's where the car rammed.
That's where the car rammed all the protesters and killed this girl Heather Heyer, who's a white girl. And the film ends on a tribute to her, and then it shows the upside down American flag, which turns to black and white, and then goes away. And that was really. I didn't expect that at all. And that was really touching, and it brought me to sort of.
I was very moved by the ending, actually. Like, I really welled up, you know, and I thought that was interesting because, like, I really do think that Spike Lee is one of the unsung great directors of American cinema, but I also think that part of the argument against him is also true, you know, that he is a pamphleteer and a bit of a propagandist, right? You know, and you know that, like, when you think about great film art, it's often about things that are complex and slightly ambiguous and mysterious that might make you feel something very directly and deeply, you know, but that nonetheless kind of that they're evanescent and resonate. You know, I'm thinking of, for example, you know, the beautiful moment in Tokyo Story where, you know, the parents kind of, you know, are resigned to, like, being alone, and, you know, their children have busy lives, and there's this moment of just kind of deep sadness, you know, with the understanding that, you know, this is your life and this is your children's life and they love you and you love them, but kind of, I find that, like, deeply moving, right? And in ways that I'm not explaining it well because I can't quite put my finger on why I find
I know what you mean.
Moving and true, right? So
and you feel that if it were more didactic, that would be lost.
That's right, and I think because Spike Lee, in a way, is a pamphleteer, you know, he's always more sure of himself. So, which is a paradox, right? Because, you know, on the one hand, what he wants to do is get a discussion going, right? But on the other hand, he's very sure about what the parameters of the debates are, right? And then it becomes about debate rather than people or feeling, right? So I have kind of this ambivalence about that. And I think, you know, to me, like, his greatest films are, you know, when that pamphlet is almost like lit up like a flame, really, like Do the Right Thing is an example of that. Or on films of his which are not issue films, you know?
Can I disagree with you?
You can, of course.
I'm not disagreeing specifically about Spike Lee, largely because I've actually only seen 2 other Spike Lee films, and he's someone who this week I'm going to make sure I see the whole lot. The other 2 I've seen are Inside Man, which is not sort of hugely political. It's a good movie, but
I think that was his biggest hit.
It may have been, yeah. And the other one I've seen is Jungle Fever.
Yes, I love Jungle Fever.
Which I liked, but I don't remember that well.
Well, but that in a way, I mean, I think that's a great film. But it is an issue film as well. It's about, you know, debates around racial, you know, whether a black and white couple, whether...
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just saying that I'm not speaking too specifically about Spike Lee, though, because I just don't remember that all that well, and I haven't seen his other work.
Okay, no, well, I'm a huge admirer.
But one I think is that I would like to see more propaganda in movies. And what I mean by that is I get a little bit sick and tired of ambiguity, especially when it's ambiguity. David Bordwell, I think we may have spoken about it before even, David Bordwell has written about strategic ambiguity, where a film won't let you know what it thinks, and it gives you different ways of interpreting it so that it doesn't alienate anyone, basically, and doesn't hurt its bottom line. And I want to know what an artist thinks. I don't want it necessarily to be hitting you over the head and trying to... trying to scream at you that this is what you should think. I mean, we talked about A Wrinkle in Time and how you literally had Oprah sort of saying, this is the way the world should be and I am right. Like, I'm not talking about that, but I want to know what an artist thinks, really. And I think that's what you get in this film. And I really like that. I want to know what your opinion is, and in a way that I can disagree if I want.
No, but I just think films are not essays, you know.
I'm not talking about an essay though. I'm talking about wanting. I don't like the idea of ambiguity masking.
I'm not talking about ambiguity. I'm talking about mystery. I mean, I think things are I think the best artists do things that, on the one hand, affect you directly. You understand them, right? But as soon as you try to consciously explicate what gave you that understanding, what gave rise to that feeling, it evaporates, because actually the film is greater than you are. Like, yeah, the film has kind of given you this deep and complex feeling or understanding, and that's what I think great art does, you know. And I don't think that, you know, dramatizing contemporary debates on an issue often succeeds in doing anything as great as Ozu or Buñuel, or for me Antonioni, or people like that. I just don't see it. And I think actually that you know, that Spike Lee is a great pamphleteer, you know, and this is one of his very best films. And, you know, he's telling stories that need to be told, and he's kind of dramatizing a history that needs to be known. You know, for me, there's no question about any of that. But I also think that that's his strength, and that's also his limitation as an artist.
I appreciate the fact that I basically come out of this film going, I know exactly what the filmmaker thinks, and it gives me room to disagree, it gives me room to interpret. I mean, that's why we can have a whole conversation about it. It's not as simple as saying I've read an essay and now I know. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
There is clearly room for interpretation. The story is being told artfully and through images that require interpretation.
Well, let me tell you, if we are going to do another podcast on this, I recommend that you watch Bamboozled, because Bamboozled.
This week I'm going to absolutely see everything of Spike Lee's.
Well, begin with Bamboozled, because that's kind of a history of black representation in cinema. That is its theme.
Sure.
You know, and I think it links up very interestingly with this one. The films that I like best are, you know, his, like, Clockers, you know, which I think is one of the great unsung masterpieces of American cinema.
Right.
Right. And it's just a drama. Right. So, and of course I love She's Gotta Have It. And I mean, actually for me, there was a period where, I mean, he's just such a, you know, significant filmmaker. She's Gotta Have It is a landmark film. It really kind of began, you know, or was central. It didn't necessarily begin. There was a cluster of films, you know, that really began the whole American independent cinema movement in the mid-'80s. And She's Gotta Have It was one of them, you know. So, and then kind of, you know, I saw School Days, and of course Do the Right Thing, and Mo Better Blues, and Jungle Fever. You know, I didn't see Malcolm X, but then I did see Crooklyn and Clockers and Girl 6. And then I kind of the films that he's done since then, I've only seen Bamboozled.
Right.
Right. So basically, since the year 2000, I kind of I haven't.
25th Hour was 2000, wasn't it? You've seen that?
Yes, I have. Okay, so but since the year 2000,
Yeah.
I thought. Yeah. So I think it's interesting that he's come back, you know, with this kind of issue film. Yeah, that he's made this kind of issue film that feels so alive and resonant and emotional. I think it's a great film.
I think the phrase issue film has just the barest kind of negative connotation in that it suggests that is all it is. See what I mean? Whereas this film, it suggests that the film is limited in a way, which I don't think it is. But that's a nitpick just in the phrase.
Yes. I mean, I feel ambivalent because actually I do think it is a limitation. Yeah.
Okay.
You know, I kind of, for example, I never feel that I know anything about the people involved, right? Like, you know, it doesn't give you much of an insight into, you know, who was this woman who was a student activist? You know, who is this guy who isn't, you know, is the first black policeman in Springfield, Colorado, and what's his history? What are his wants, his desires, his psychology, his history? Like, you know, like they're all points in an argument rather than people.
That's true, actually. Yeah, none of them, even the main character, is really a full person. They are all. Every character is filtered to you through the issue of the film.
Yes.
And I think that's actually a fair sort of criticism.
Now, that might not be a bad thing in making this film a huge success in the ways that it is a huge success. Because I have no doubt that the film will generate an argument. It's a very intelligent argument. I'm really glad to see artists engaging in social arguments, engaging with the world that they live in, and kind of trying to imagine a way that it could be bettered, right? That is, I think, also part of the job of art, to do those things. But, I do think that this kind of work, to me, is, it's not... So in my estimation, the very greatest works are those like Lubitsch and Ozu and where you really, I don't know, you just have this, they increase your understanding of what it is to be human.
Do you think Lubitsch could have made a film like this?
No, not at all.
Is that a limitation of Lubitsch? I'm needling you here, but...
No, well, let me give you a response, because actually I think Lubitsch did the best film about Nazi Germany, and he did it as a comedy, and he did it absolutely brilliantly as a comedy, and it's the best satire and condemnation, that I know of in the worst kind of circumstances. It's a film that you didn't want to see.
Which film was that?
To Be or Not to Be.
Okay.
Which is both a great political film. It's an argument. It's an indictment of a regime. And it does so all as a comedy, and it's also kind of a work of art, really. Whereas I would argue that this is a great film. It's very entertaining. And it makes a great argument that will generate lots of lively debate. I wouldn't say it's a work of art.
Okay. Also, the film that people really speak about is a comedy that's anti-Nazi comedy. It's The Great Dictator. Chaplin.
Yes, also.
That came to mind for me during BlacKkKlansman in its sense of humour, and I think it treads a really delicate line. Because there are laugh out loud funny things in BlacKkKlansman. It has a really good sense of humour, and at points I was thinking, at what point does ridiculing the KKK and the various people within it and the way that they think and respond to things, at what point does ridiculing that trivialise it? Yes. To the point where you're not taking it seriously enough, because they are a real threat, and when it breaks into modern day footage of the resurgence of fascism and racism, basically in America, it becomes very clear that this is not funny. Yes. This is a real threat, and people have really died over this in countless numbers over the years. And it is a delicate line. So, for instance, there's the moments with David Duke where there are a couple of... He's always on the phone to him. And you could call it a prank phone call, but it's not really. It's undercover. But there are a couple of moments where it becomes a prank phone call, and Ron has another cop with him, and the second time he has a bunch of cops with him, listening in on the call, laughing, while Ron basically takes the piss out of David Duke on the other end. And those are really funny scenes. David Duke has no idea. It's David Duke talking about how he can tell whether he's talking to a black or a white man over the phone by his voice, and the way he pronounces certain words. Yeah. And of course, he doesn't. The joke is he doesn't realise he is talking to a black man. It's clearly David Duke is an incredibly stupid person, but he's also someone who has commanded an awful lot of power amongst some very violent people for a very long time. And there's even one moment that the film is very, very transparent about references to Donald Trump. They talk. There's a reference to America First. They chant America First. There's one point where they say something like "Make America Great Again." They don't quite say that bit. It's a version. And of course, there's one point where Ron says, "No, that's stupid. America would never elect a president like David Duke." Which, of course, and that gets a big laugh because they bloody have.
I think they're all very direct references to the present moment.
Yeah.
And to Trump.
So the reference to David Duke then is this is someone who has been very powerful for a very long time, even if people have essentially taken the piss out of him for a long time. And it's that I say so. People have taken the piss out of him, but that hasn't stopped him being important, and that hasn't stopped him having an influence.
Well, also, I don't like the way people call, these right-wing extreme, or people with right-wing and very extreme views stupid, because I think it kind of undermines the threat that they represent. You just feel superior to them, and in fact, they represent a real threat. And really, you can't be stupid and hold those kinds of positions. I think it's better just to accept that they have a different view of human beings, a different view of the world, and that they're very intelligent in finding strategic ways of achieving their goals that shouldn't be minimized.
And so what I am trying to reckon with at the minute is whether this is a good or bad thing in the film, in that the film portrays Duke as stupid in those phone calls, right? And you laugh heartily at how stupid he is being, and then it's short-lived, because moments later you're seeing footage of Charlottesville and the car driving into the protesters, and David Duke in modern day.
Exactly.
And the question is that short-lived nature, because the film is giving you a big hearty laugh and actually a win over David Duke, because what happens at the end is Ron reveals to Duke over the phone that he is a black man who's been undercover the whole time. Ha ha ha. And like I say, that's short-lived because it's cut later with the modern day kind of tragedies. And is it a good thing that it's short-lived because it should make you think? Or is it a bad thing because the film is giving you that laugh, and it's not really?
No, because I think that's not the only thing that the film does.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good thing because on the one hand, it gives you that laugh, right? And it shows you situations, it gives you a point of view on them, and so on. But then I think the ending is very significant, because what happens is, you have Superfly and, Cleopatra Jones, the hero and the heroine of the story, who are kind of framed in a way by those blaxploitation films and dress and, and attitudes and so on. Yeah. And then there's that famous shot, which actually Spike Lee in
the
Q&A described
the double dolly.
Which I always thought of as a treadmill shot, that they put the camera on the treadmill, right?
Yeah, well, it's the camera dollying, and the actors are on a platform dollying as well.
That's right. So that,
and it's become his signature.
Okay, but that's actually taken from Le Parapluie de Cherbourg.
Yeah. Oh no, he says that himself. He didn't invent it, but he's made it his signature.
I saw it in Jacques Denis first. But anyway, that's not the point. The point I'm trying to make here is that you have like this almost mythic couple now, if it's framed by Shaft and Cleopatra Jones and the imagery of coffee and Superfly and so on, and then they've come together as a couple now, and they go on this treadmill, and they go into a future which is threatening, but on the other hand, it's also kind of it's dreamy and glamorous and and then what does the shot transition to? The present. And what's the present? David Duke's still there, and he's being taken more seriously than ever, right? He's at a rally, and he's now a national.
He has the ear of the president.
He has the ear of the president. He's a national figure. And then what is that gone along with? All the protests, the black people being brutalized by the police. Kind of Jews will not replace us.
Thanks for making me say it again.
Yeah, and that's actually, so things have not improved, things have not gotten better. If anything, actually they've regressed.
There's a phrase: the ending is the conceit, and the ending of this film is the entire project, which is to say things have not changed. This has been going on forever, and it is still going on, and it's just as bad as it ever was.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that might be a good note to end the first part of our podcast.
Yeah, I really would like to see it again. I think
Okay.
there's a lot of food for thought. I'm sorry I had to cut it slightly short because I've got to get to work. I'm half an hour late, but
Yes. Well, anyway, I think this has been a good discussion. So we'll continue at another point.
yeah, I've really enjoyed it.
I hope you join us for the rest of the discussion. And thank you very much for listening.
Yeah.
We are on Twitter.
SoundCloud, Facebook, iTunes, YouTube, and all the rest of the internet.
Thank you very much for listening.